Tim Pool is arguably one of the most logical alternative hosts in all of the internet. Somebody who's quite against the idea of embellishing conspiracies. And he has as a guest Alex Jones, known as basically the conspiracy king. So what do they have to talk about? Elves? Please stay tuned to find out more. Bravo, Temple. I'm not being facetious. I usually don't do this. I usually don't talk about other people's episodes, but this is an exception. I watch Tim Pool quite a bit. I think he's a very logical person, and it's just one side, one side of the argument. I also listen to Kyle Kalinske on the other side, and I used to listen a lot to Alex Jones. So this to me was like a gold mine in terms of internet episodes. But I want to say bravo because of the guts, the ability to take somebody who has been essentially banned from the internet and bring him on as a guest. Somebody who a lot of people think is absolutely crazy. He got Spotify employees basically protesting and risking their jobs to get this guy off or deplatformed. And Tim Pool managed to get 60,000 concurrent live people watching this. I don't know all the numbers, but to me, I feel like that's more than most news stations are able to get. So that's absolutely amazing. And, they ran it through so many different topics. I think the thing must have lasted like almost 4 hours. And I literally had to take notes. Part of what I wanted to do is basically kind of go over some of the major topics and just kind of bent it a little bit towards things that we've talked about on this show, because they did kind of bring up a lot of subjects that we just kind of brushed by. And yeah, just give the audience a new perspective of what was happening in that show. So I want to start out by talking about, elves. We've made episodes trying to debunk elves before. But in this particular case, they're talking about interdimensional demons. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I kid you not. The idea was that there are these psychopathic elites, and this is mostly brought on by Alex Jones. I don't think Tim Pool quite agreed with this. But, Michael Malice, who was in the show, actually seemed to be kind of possibly on board. And then we also had Ian Crossland and, of course, the producer Lydia. But this idea was that these elites or certain individuals who have the power, or certain cults, they kind of prey on kids for the reason of being able to kind of harness this like energy that is almost anti-God or anti-Jesus. And that in doing so, they gain power or knowledge from these demons. I'm not gonna say that we went that far in talking about that specifically in our episode. But I thought it was really interesting because I went back to the kitchen and I kind of was telling my roommate, hey, they're talking about this. And the mother, who's a very logical person, she just goes, oh yeah, the Mayans used to do that. And I was like, wait, but that's what they said. In the episode, they were talking about how the Aztecs and the Mayans used to basically sacrifice kids. It was kind of a funny coincidence. But the thing that interested me the most was the conversation regarding these kind of like hallucinogen experiences where people would go into this different realm and essentially encounter beings. And this seemed to be agreed by both Michael Malice and Alex Jones, that when you're in this kind of other world, that people are kind of seeing the same thing. That this is not just hallucinogenic experiences, but it's something that is more. It's something that can be verified by multiple people who are having similar experiences at the exact same time. The reason why this interested me is because we just, only a couple episodes ago, we talked about this idea of how, there were psychologists like Dr. E. Mack who studied alien abductions, and he had a really difficult time ascertaining the differences between aliens and these spiritual beings that were being witnessed by shamans, by people in hallucinogenic experiences, almost to say that people, when they hallucinate, they almost describe these beings as these intelligent figures, almost like they're like aliens. And so this kind of opens up a really interesting question. Are aliens really extraterrestrial? Or could they be interdimensional? So, Alex Jones can be crazy because he talks about interdimensional beings and all this stuff, but I mean, we know UFO crafts exist. We know that people, when they have hallucinogenic experiences, they're experiencing these other beings. So when I said that they were talking about elves, I kind of meant it. They were talking about maybe ethereal elves. I don't know what you want to call it, but the question that really interests me is, what are these beings? And are they the same things that we see in UFO crafts and the UFOs that have been admitted by the Navy, for example? And going back to the globalists kind of taking advantage of, quote unquote, these demonic forces, we did make a video not exactly supporting QAnon, but just kind of saying that these circles of power, these elite circles, whether you're talking about Hollywood, whether you're talking about political circles, that there is kind of a proclivity to prey on kids. And that this could be kind of like a psychological issue as well, that when you have too much concentration of power with too much immunity, that people just like to kind of take the ultimate prize, so to speak, almost take somebody's will away from them. And I think this is what Alex Jones was saying, the quote-unquote demons feed off. I was watching this one video on YouTube. It was definitely taken down. I think it was like a call for uprising. Well, I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about this in YouTube, but I'll just keep it like this. The people were basically having almost cannibalistic type of rituals. And if this video is real, I don't know if it's real or not. If it's real, it kind of coincides with some of the things that they talked about. It's crazy. I'm not going to go so far as to say that that's real. And just something that they talked about and something I've looked at before on YouTube. And I'll just leave it at that, I guess. Something else that they talked about that we talked often about was kind of Biden and his shenanigans. And, I'm an independent and I used to be a liberal. In fact, I can say that my voting record, having known Tim Pool's voting record, it's very similar. I think Tim Pool voted for Ron Paul. As you can see, I actually painted Ron Paul in my door to make sure that anybody who entered my room knows who Ron Paul is. I think Tim Pool supported Bernie Sanders. Of course, that's how we started the channel. We started this channel by reporting on some of the stuff that was happening with the elections. Something that we really talked about that they kind of brought up a lot was the kind of voter shenanigans. And part of the reason why we started this as Second Earth News, talking about the whole 2016 primaries with Hillary Clinton, was because I really believe that Hillary Clinton might have cheated at elections. In fact, we talked about this, and it seems that they kind of agreed, that Alex Jones and Tim Pool seemed to agree that this was happening. One of the big episodes that we made was when we had a Stanford study that seemed to indicate that Hillary Clinton had won almost all the states that were only electronic ballots, that had no paper ballot trails. And I think she won like 22 out of 23 of those states. And the statistical analysis from the Stanford study had a standard deviation of 3.76, which is basically like close to 1 in 10,000 chance that that would just randomly happen. So then when I look at this election, and you might be like, oh, okay, it's Joe Biden, it's not Hillary Clinton, but I'll get back to this. When you look at this election, you see that, Biden polls 4 of the closest states. I mean, just on the surface, just talking about the surface probabilities, and we're talking about math here. I'm not saying that there was election fraud. I'm just talking about math. That for him to win the 4 closest states, the chances of that would be 1 in 16. It's a very low chance when the vote totals are so close. So there are already kind of statistical anomalies just on the surface of it. And I haven't even gotten to some of the counties, some of the votes actually being higher than the registered voters. So something that was interesting about that experiment with Hillary Clinton is that Lee Camp, a regular guest of Jimmy Dore, actually reported on the exact same story a week later. If you ladies and gentlemen have not seen this, here's a quick clip.
That's always that's in the standard reply from anyone who's about to critique the media on CNN. Hillary Clinton did much better in states where it's easier to commit fraud. Wow! This is me shocked. So I started wondering why you haven't heard anything about this on the mainstream media.
It just so happens that Hillary Clinton tends to win those states overwhelmingly. And for the states in which does have a paper ballot, it just so happens that she tends to lose those states at an unusual number. Now let me tell you the type of number we're talking about. We're talking about a standard deviation of 3.74. If you were to look at this mathematical analysis, if you were to look at the formulas and how they calculated, the capability of that happening by just coincidence is less than 1 in 10,000.
Eric Schmidt, who used to work for Google, well, after he quit Google, he actually donated a lot of technical assistance to Hillary Clinton. And now it seems that Joe Biden might actually bring him into the cabinet. So I'm not saying that Biden and Hillary are the same thing, but there are some tangential connections that makes you wonder if the general cabinets, if let's say Hillary was president, if she would have similar plans to Biden. And you consider, that Biden has already talked about liberating Syria, which it does seem like that could potentially be a war in Syria. And you think about some of the other shenanigans about Biden, like the Iraq war, the crime bill, just the deciding of China. And this is also really crazy because Alex Jones talked a lot about the Chinese communist takeover.
Laboratory for new surveillance technology.
You're thought criminal.
6 times more policemen this year.
Unorthodox loyalties which can only lead to thought crime. There is truth, and there is untruth.
And forever, before this whole laptop issue with Biden happened, we were talking and trying to mention to our audience that Hunter Biden was still listed in one of China's biggest trust funds. And of course, the laptop comes out and then all this information now becomes verified, but we still weren't able to talk about it. So it was really cool to see Alex Jones on the Tim pool with 150,000 people, 160,000 people being able to talk about these type of things. And then we also had a video like 8 months ago that was like China versus 1984. This is like way before some of the allegations of espionage with our academic circles were becoming part of mainstream news. And suffice to say, that video got demonetized. It seemed like somebody internally didn't like that video. I'm not going to say anything other than that. They talked about the COVID-19 lockdown. They mentioned Sweden, how it doesn't make a difference. This is something that we want to talk a lot about. The idea of how group immune systems work, that this is an actual viable strategy. It's something that Sweden is doing right now, and it seems to be working for them. Granted, Sweden has very specific demographics. They're kind of in the mountains. They're isolated pockets of towns. So it's difficult to kind of extrapolate. But I was really happy to see them talk about COVID-19 lockdown, because this is another plan that Biden has potentially, is possibly locking down the damn country. It's, to be honest with you, it's part of the reason why I left. They're talking about Trump might be actually creating covert departments to, I don't know, like they were talking about like potential civil war. I mean, more Alex Jones was talking about it, but this is something that Temple has hinted, just not in the sense that Trump is creating these secret organizations. Temple only mentioned about the chief justices that were brought up and that had decided on the Al Gore Bush presidency. Interesting. I'm just, if you're in America, I would just, if you can get out of the city. I mean, I loved my apartment in Los Angeles. Absolutely loved it there. But, when I walked out in this one parking lot that was supposed to be like a really nice restaurant, I mean, Gordon Ramsay was the chef there. And then I see like 5 different like human feces littered all over the place, seemingly from different people. It's like, what am I doing here? That's part of the reason why I left. I mean, there are various reasons why I left to Mexico. Yeah, well, let's just move on. One thing that Temple did mention was how Rand Paul talked about this one person by the initial of, I guess it was Alex Jones who gave it away. I know whose name it is, but I know I can't say either. But it was the initials of the same initials of Electric Circuit. Okay. So this person, it was kind of like an interesting conversation about how there are certain individuals who might be part of the quote unquote deep state or might be pulling certain strings, that it's like you're not even allowed to mention their name. It's like, do we live in a democracy? Are we living in an era where people are allowed to have liberties? And I mean, I think our founding fathers would literally be churning on their graves. So would George Carlin if they knew what was going on right now. The fact that I can't mention this other initial regarding the 2016 primaries related to a murder, and I think many of you know the name, I just give you the initials, SR. The fact that I can't even mention his name because it could be related to Wikipedia and Julian Assange, who's jailed, and Edward Snowden is jailed, and somebody who worked with Edward Snowden is Glenn Greenwald, and he had to leave The Intercept and basically had to leave the very news company that he started because they were censoring him. So once again, I'm going to ask, are we living in a democracy? And it's really interesting because they also talk about the polarization of people's conversations and how that's kind of splitting into two different sectors of individuals. And the reason why I found that interesting, something that they didn't mention, is there were actual studies. This is more like in the realm of psychology, but there were studies that indicated that the differences between Democrats and Republicans, it's not just about like a philosophical or an ideological difference. They actually detected that their brains are different. For Republicans, they're a lot more reactive towards protection. That's probably why they favor guns. They don't seem to trust in others, that the others can do things better than they themselves can do. Whereas Democrats, well, they tend to be more artists. They kind of tend to have this very open way of thinking. It's something that like Jordan Peterson talked a lot about the different personalities. But what I'm trying to say is that there are actual brain differences, like physiological differences in the brain. And then when you have the social media, which is essentially seeking for people's attention. And so you got to think about like Twitter, for example, their main commodity, the main way that they're going to make money is by splintering our attention. And that's why a lot of these social medias are kind of snip clips, very short sentences, because if, let's say you go to the Joe Rogan show and you speak for 4 hours, well, then Joe Rogan basically has everybody for those 4 hours. And in the social media, that's not how they make the ultimate amount of money. They make the ultimate amount of money by splintering our attentions. And when you have multiple companies competing for your attention, well, the polarization becomes almost inevitable, especially when you have these quote unquote physiological differences. So I think that whatever is happening between the left and the right now, it's a multifaceted issue, not just related to physiological differences, but related to the clickbait culture, the information warfare, if we want to call that, but the new information age. It's just a byproduct of that. And it's really, it's going to take a concerted effort, one that actually goes against financial incentives to get us back into a compromised state. And it's really sad that we're in this kind of points in our existence. And what really doesn't help is the fact that certain organizations, mostly like establishment media, in my opinion, they're kind of blatantly lying to the people. Not all the time, but enough times where it's kind of like it seems like they're filling an agenda from a specific side. Call it like the establishment side. That the establishment have a certain goal. Alex Jones would say that this is like a globalized world and they're trying to bring it all in and everybody's getting killed. I don't know, maybe he's right. Maybe there's this crazy plan by Bill Gates to, homogenize all the people. I don't know, maybe they want to compete with China for our data. Think about it, in the information age, China, it's not that they have better products, it's that they have more data. The reason why, in terms of artificial intelligence, that China could potentially overtake the US is because of their kind of tyrannical system. Because in their tyrannical system, they don't have to ask for your permission. So is this playing into why the United States is becoming more homogenized and more censored? Because certain organizations, certain establishment feel that there's a need to gather our information. And if for nothing else, to be able to win this artificial intelligence race. Because you got to think that whoever gets ahead in this artificial intelligence race, they're probably going to stay ahead for quite some time. So I do think that certain intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, who knows, that they might have invested interest in trying to get us less Americanized. And it's in my understanding, I think that's the main reason why so many establishment individuals hated Trump so much. I don't think it's about his language. I think it's about what he stood for. I think it's these American values that he stood for that went steadfast against like mega corporations like Walmart and Amazon that are going to benefit from a COVID-19 lockdown. They also talked about Trump's sexual habits. Yeah, we can skip that one. I'll just leave it at leaked photos. Maybe you ladies and gentlemen know what's happening with that one. Going back to the whole, was there like election fraud that happened, or I guess it would be voter fraud? All I'm going to state is that mathematically there were statistical anomalies, but there's also something else that people need to think about. Think about what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. And going back to the establishment, they really tried to convince you that that was just a suicide, even though he broke bones that wasn't possible, even though he was taken out of suicide watch for no explanation, even though everything that could have gone wrong, guards sleeping, cameras breaking, went wrong. The media still makes you believe that that was suicide. But I think most people with half a brain will know that that probably was not the case. So this is another way that the establishment is able to, even if it's in your face, even if you know it's a lie, they will still write out the lie because of how much is at stake. How many billionaires, people with a lot of influence, a lot of money, people in the royal family, how much they had at stake with the information that Jeffrey Epstein had. So I ask the same question for our elections. Would it be worth to cheat? So I'm just talking about incentives here. If Olympic athletes will, cheat, will take steroids, will put weights in their bobsled to win gold medals because so much is at stake, why would it be any different for this particular election? It doesn't mean that it's happening. I'm just giving you the mathematics of statistical anomalies and saying that the incentives seem to be pretty high. And then going back to what we reported with Hillary Clinton, well, it seemed like a Stanford study already shown that there was massive statistical anomalies with the 2016 primaries with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. So just want to put that out there. I'm not going to try to claim one way or another because I think I just don't have enough information. I can only talk about incentives and the mathematics behind the anomalies. At one point, they talked about Mitch McConnell, that maybe he's not for Trump. That he might want to take over the Senate, that if Trump is not president, that Mitch McConnell would theoretically have more power because the Senate would be such an important role for the Republicans. I don't have much to say. I did at one point make a meme, but take it as you will. I don't think it means anything, the meme. I'm just kind of joking, but just thought it'd be fun to share. And then going back to the elections, I thought it was like pretty shocking. I don't know if you caught this, but towards the end of the Temple episode, Alex Jones basically admitted that his brother-in-law ended up being one of the witnesses who saw voter fraud. I mean, that's kind of like, for anybody who thinks, there's no evidence, or the media will say that nothing's happening. There's, look, the man himself is claiming that his own family is one of the witnesses. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of a big deal when he said that. And I just kind of wanted to brush up on that. Yeah, I guess just to leave it off, I just wanted to say that in 2009, I did call on the Alex Jones show. I got through the line. And at the very, very moment that I was about to get a chance to speak with Alex Jones ended the show, and yeah, I never got my chance. But I was going to basically tell him that Obama's head economic advisor, Austin Goolsbee, was part of the Skull and Bones. And I want to ask what Alex Jones thought about that, or if he knew anything about that. And this did actually happen before the 2009 bailout, where economically Obama was advised in creating one of the biggest wealth transfers in the history of America. Well, that is until now, with this whole COVID-19. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. If you want to reach me, you can reach me at my email at eafiles.contact@gmail.com. Do not forget to subscribe. We need all the help we can get. If you share, that would definitely help. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. This is Felipe speaking, signing out.